Across the country and right here in Central Texas, should Confederate statues and monuments be removed?
In Georgetown, a newly formed group is working toward a compromise. KVU's Christy Millward shows us what they suggest instead.
For more than a year, groups have talked about this statue here in Georgetown of a Confederate soldier. Some say it's offensive and needs to come down, while others say it honors their heritage. Now a new group says there's another option. Put up another statue over here on this side of the courthouse, something they feel everyone can support. It's a piece that has divided people in the county.
As a black citizen, I feel disenfranchised from being a truly appreciated and welcome citizen.
I feel it's part of my family's heritage.
But now two faith leaders in Georgetown, Rabbi Jonathan Dade and Reverend Kurt Hine, are coming together to try to unify and heal.
It's really bringing people together. Right now we're so polarized we can't seem to talk about something.
Dade and Hine call their efforts the Georgetown Civil Rights Initiative and want to work with everyone to find a common ground.
The statue itself really isn't the core issue.
But sometimes you have to admit maybe there's no racism for you, but there's other people that have experienced racism.
The two come from different backgrounds.
My family was called racial slurs here in this town.
Really, the statue never bothered me personally. You know, I saw it as a historical artifact.
And they feel those different perspectives will help bring everyone together for something new. Instead of taking down the Confederate soldier statue, they want to put up a new statue modeled after this emancipation statue in Barbados.
We believe that celebrates deliverance from oppression for all kinds of people.
I think we only honor history when we tell the full story, when we look at both our successes and our past failures.
A look at the past that they hope will bring a positive future. Now they tell me they don't know how much money they'd have to raise for a statue like this, or even if the county would approve it. But they say it's about starting a conversation and gaining support. So we have a link to their website on our website at KVU.com. Reporting in Georgetown, Christy Millward, KVU News.
All right, everyone. So in very general terms, that's what we're here to discuss. Kurt and myself, we're ministers, so we're not necessarily connected with the city other than just being citizens who want to try to do what we can. And as ministers, I'll admit, I think that what we're trying to undertake is very difficult. So if you all don't mind, I would like to start our afternoon off in prayer. God, I want to thank you for the ability for us neighbors to come together in love, to be able to listen to each other, to be able to dialogue civilly, but also to be able to move forward and figure out ways that our community cannot be divided like a lot of other communities are, but actually come together. And I pray that you give us the power to do this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. So basically my job is to introduce what we're doing today, give a little bit of introduction about myself, and then we're going to kind of progress through the agenda, which, like I said, is right over there to my right. So I'll have a seat just to kind of bring the informality down just a little bit. But in reintroducing myself, I'll start in 2013. So my wife and I lived in the Northern Virginia suburbs in Springfield, Virginia, and I was recruited by a subsidiary of Michelin to leave PepsiCo Frito-Lay and come here to Texas. And when we came here to Texas, we knew I was going to be working in Austin, so I tried to find, within a 45-minute drive, a suburb that was economically vibrant, safe, and welcoming. And out of all the cities I went to, I thought Georgetown was all that. Georgetown was also charming. And ideologically, I fall within the conservative camp, so for me, Georgetown was a perfect fit. In May of 2017, though, I was at the Georgetown Country Club when someone looked me directly in the eye and said, "Interracial couples are despicable." Someone else looked me directly in the eye and they pointed at me and said, "There's going to be a hanging." And the last thing that happened was there was a group of 60 people that petitioned for the sugar and poop. The sugar could stay, but the poop had to be gone by Saturday or else. And I'm one of the only black members at the Georgetown Country Club. For me, that was extremely painful for my family, but it was one of those things that it made me realize, unfortunately, racism does exist. And in my adult life, that was my first time ever really dealing with it at such a large level. In August of 2017, we all saw extremists use cities with Confederate monuments and symbols to be civil rights battlegrounds, and someone died over it. And what I want to say is the reason why is because symbols communicate things. Whether or not we want to admit it, symbols and things, they talk to us. And we have to be mindful of the interpretations thereof. In the religious world, the biggest example I can think of is the rainbow. Ideologically and theologically, a lot of ministers believe that the rainbow is a sign between God and man that God would never flood the earth again. Nowadays, the rainbow means a completely different thing. It can be interpreted as a different symbol. So depending on that, if you put a rainbow on the front of your church, you should not be surprised with the demographics that would come into your building. You can either use that as a sign to welcome them in or as a sign to push them away, but you should understand symbols mean different things. A lot of other cities are looking at Confederate monuments this exact same way. They're asking themselves, how are these symbols being interpreted? And unfortunately, because of the negative interpretations of these symbols, most other cities are voting to remove these statues. What I believe is we don't necessarily have to remove, but the status quo is not going to work because it results in someone dying or something very grave for our city, as we've seen in others. I think now more than ever, we need to come together in healing and also in unity in order for Georgetown to remain charming, economically vibrant, safe, and welcoming. I'm honored to be one of the moderators for today, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, it's an honor to meet with all of you today. I thought that the last time we met was incredible. I mean, there was a spirit of dialogue, a spirit of actually trying to listen to the other, to learn, to come together, to respect each other as persons. And for me, that's really what this is all about, respecting each other as persons, being created in the image of God. I look forward to our discussion today and seeing what each and every one of us has to say and contribute to this. I'm Kurt Hine. I'm the pastor of Light of Christ, Anglican Church here in Georgetown. I grew up in Driftwood, Texas, so small Texas town. You blink and you're through it. You may have heard of Salt Lick Barbecue. Anyone here? Yeah. So that's where I grew up, Salt Lick Barbecue. Moved here to Georgetown about 2 years ago. And I love this town, fell in love with it instantly. It's like, it reminds me of the little towns I grew up in, like next to Wimberley, San Marcos, etc. I love this town. And I've seen the Confederate monument. It never personally bothered me, as you saw in the video. I saw it as a historical artifact, a relic. But what happened in Charlottesville really changed the way I viewed things, in the sense that I saw that this monument has a diversity of views for different people, right? A diversity of views for different people. Some people see it as something that honors their heritage, their great-great-grandfather that fought in the war, etc. Other people see it as implicitly supporting segregation and slavery, and I think that should be evident in the fact that people like the neo-Nazis rally around such monuments. And I think we can all agree that we find that to be disturbing, whatever side of this table that we're on. So what we're trying to do is to do two things. One, I think it's important to honor our history by telling the full story, right? The full story of our history. And then also, I think we need to move forward as a community to proactively declare in our public square the sacred truth that all people are created by God of equal value. Okay, and that, as a minister, that's something that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm really, frankly, honored to be able to be here and to moderate this discussion, and I look forward to learning, to open up my ears. I'm already learning a ton in this process. Jonathan,
Same
too, as well. And I look forward to learning more from each and every one of you.
So the next thing we're going to do is the previous participants. This is our second roundtable, and we've actually intend to be able to use these roundtables in very quick fashion to catalyze change and come up with solutions. We don't need to do this for months and years. This is our second roundtable. We're praying by third or fourth, we should be able to catalyze the change we need. The individuals that made it to our first roundtable were Mr. Jeff, Rob, and Ms. Jaquita. So we're going to allow them to give 2 minutes to reintroduce themselves and maybe just mention a couple words they've learned from their last roundtable before we allow those that are new to the roundtable to get a little bit more time to introduce themselves. So if we don't mind, Jaquita, you may go first.
My name is Jaquita Wilson Kirby. I represent San Gabriel UU Church and their social justice program, Courageous Conversations, amongst others. I feel that I would like the statue to remain. I think the statue represents exactly what it was meant to represent, and that was segregation, racism, and slavery. That's my feeling. And when I go past the statue and I point the statue out to my children, that's what I explain to them, its purpose. When I talk about the statue outside of this community, and I explain that this statue was placed here in 1916 by the Daughters of Confederacy, I need people to know that that was an honor, that people felt that was an honor, that my community felt it was an honor, and that it was okay. And as long as it's there, I can continue to point to it and say, for the 100 years since, the community felt like that was an honor and continue to fight for it to be there. So that's why I'm here, to continue to bring heightened awareness that this is what the community values.
Thank you very much, Jaquita. Jeff, I know you were at the last roundtable. You have 2 minutes just to introduce yourself and also just give any thoughts you had from the last roundtable.
I'm Jeff Parker. I'm a commercial development consultant. The statue to me represents an honoring to people who went before us. That's pretty much what I see when I walk by it, much like I do others. I always look for unintended consequences, and it does mean different things to different people. There are a number of things I find in the square that I find terribly offensive. I think we have to step back and look at what we're saying about most of this and go, okay, if we decide that that statue needs to come down, there are a number of others that will have to come down. The Vietnam War Memorial will have to go. The Nathan Chapman Memorial will have to go. Anything associated with World War II will have to go. Anything associated with the Korean War will have to go, because those are all offensive to someone. I like to see discussion spurred, because I think once we forget history, once we stop discussing it, we repeat it pretty rapidly. And I'll hand it back over.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And Rob, introduce yourself and what you maybe learned from the last round.
Thank you. My name is Robert Ranko, and I am currently a resident of Round Rock. Been a resident of Williamson County since 2001, mostly in Georgetown. My kids still attend Georgetown schools. And I guess from the last discussion, one thing that I took away, it was more of a reaffirmation than a revelation, which was that, when you sit down with folks and you have to look them in the eye, or you have the opportunity to look them in the eye, things tend to be more civil and productive, and if there is common ground to be found, we can usually do it in person as opposed to being in separate rooms or, God forbid, on the internet. So it's a great forum. A couple of things, and part of the reason I'm here, I think dialogue about these things is important. To me, honoring the Confederacy in any way is preposterous. I don't buy the slippery slope argument, because if we only stopped honoring individuals who seceded from the United States, who took up arms against the United States to kill Americans to preserve the institution of slavery, we could stop there. And I do find it really curious. People have been in this land for thousands of years. Europeans came here about 500 years ago. But we're debating, of all of the history that we could fight to preserve the expression of, we're discussing the idea of honoring 4 years in that 500-year history. And it's the 4 years where European descendants decided that it was important to preserve the servitude of Africans, which is deplorable, and I think we all agree on that. Why would we honor and elevate 21 feet in the air a monument to that ideology? It's crazy to me. I'm not necessarily advocating destruction. I think it's a discussion we should have. Certainly context is important. Making a more complete statement, if we're talking about history, we can make a more complete and certainly a more accurate statement. But as I said at the last roundtable, to me, that is like the mantle piece of our community. It's in the county square, in the county seat, And it is the thing that apparently this community at some point thought was the most important and the most honorable thing based on placement. I don't believe that that is how we feel about it now as a community, and I think it's time to reevaluate what we have in that square. And if that's destruction, adding context, adding other monuments, I think those are all important discussions to have. But we need to do something, because as it sits, it's silly and it's unacceptable.
Thank you, Rob. All right, we have two new participants today. We have Brian and Michael. Brian, could you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah.
You have 5 minutes.
I can stand up.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. Are the mics on?
Yes, sir.
They're on, but they're not
They're
amplifying
more for
you.
the recording, not for the
They're
room
just
amplification.
Okay. My name is Brian Bolton. I'm a retired psychologist. I've lived in Georgetown for 11 years. Rabbi Dade called me a couple of days ago and asked me to participate on the Roundtable, and I was happy to do so. The basis for the invitation was a commentary that I wrote 2 or 3 weeks ago titled Scripture Sanctions Slavery. Scripture sanctions slavery. That's a tongue twister. You don't want to say it rapidly. I'm going to come back and say just a few words about that in a moment. As I understand the charge, it is for the panelists to address the question, are Civil War monuments racist? And my answer is, of course they're racist, because the Civil War was fought over slavery. There were other issues, but that was the core issue. All the historians agree on this. The Civil War was fought primarily over slavery. Furthermore, the Bible endorses slavery. Slavery is ordained by God. Scripture is clear. There's no doubt about it. All you have to do is read the Bible. The Southerners knew this. This is not new information. Well before the Civil War, the Southerners invoked God in justifying the plantation system. Now I want to move to the second part of the question, what can we do about this? I have 3 recommendations. Number 1, this may seem contradictory, we need to stop talking about slavery. It will not move us toward a resolution of the local Confederate soldier statute. Number 2, we have to acknowledge that the current situation is not satisfactory. It doesn't represent the entire community. And number 3, compromise. We have to compromise by adding explanatory plaques or historical markers or other monuments that both balance the current presentation and clarify it. Now I know that my recommendations are not going to satisfy the people on the extremes. Some people want to remove the statue. Many statues have been removed. Those people are not happy with maintaining the current statue. On the other hand, there are people who not only want to leave the statue as it is, they do not want to contaminate it with further information. These two extreme groups are not going to be happy with any resolution except the one they prefer. I think the vast majority of residents of Georgetown are somewhere in the middle. I think we can achieve resolution when people of goodwill get together with the goal of resolving this Confederate soldier controversy. Rabbi Dade.
Thank you. All right. Michael, if you could.
Hi, my name's Michael Custer. I moved to Williamson County in 2011. I'm a retired colonel from the United States Army. I'm also have a doctorate in public health. And I wanted to come here because in some ways I may be an extremist because I think this is an unambiguous moral issue to have the statue on government property because it implies two things. It implies that somehow the government endorses those lies and things that people advocated, saying that the war wasn't about slavery and those kinds of mythologies. And I personally don't see that if you move a statue to a museum and put it in the context that it was raised, I don't see how that's disrespectful. But it doesn't belong on government ground. It doesn't belong in front of a county courthouse where we have people of all different races and all different creeds, and the ethnic and cultural diversity of the United States is challenged by that statue on government ground. And so I love the statue that you all are proposing, but I do not believe that Confederate statue should stay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So as you'll see, the Reverend and I, we wanted to bring a diversity to the panel. We wanted to bring different people that reflect different views throughout Georgetown to say, okay, how can we figure out something together? It's not just something that I decide from people that think the way I do, or the Reverend decides from people that think the way he does. We try to truly fill the roundtable as equally as possible. Unfortunately, some people weren't able to make it last minute. We invited up to have 8 participants this time. Our first roundtable had a total of 4. We wanted this roundtable to be a little bit larger. The first roundtable's purpose was more us getting to know each other and show, kind of like what the psychologist was talking about, we could either stop talking about the issues, but our first roundtable showed that we can actually do so civilly. This second roundtable is a little bit more community engagement, community involvement. We would like your input on things that you think are relevant. Maybe ask the participants some questions. You can even ask the Reverend and I a couple questions, and we would like to dialogue a little bit, have a little bit of two-way communication. That way, towards the third roundtable, we're already able to present an option to the powers that be and say, as a community, the community has spoken. Now, obviously, this is a small cross-section, but out of our own church funds, we put in a front page ad on the paper to let everyone know we were going to be here, and we tried to even let everyone know on social media. So we want people to show up. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't, but again, from the cross-section of what we have, we're trying to figure out what does that middle group of the community want, and then we want to be able to propose that to the powers that be. There are some 3x5 cards right there on the table. We invite you to write down a question, a comment, a thought, whatever may be on your mind, and for the next 20 minutes, those people up here as participants, and again, you can even ask us moderators questions, but we prefer you more focus the questions to the participants, and we would like them to respond. The reason why we think this is so important is because when you go to a city council meeting or commissioner's court, there's not a lot of two-way conversation. You have a couple minutes to speak something, they speak back, and then decisions are made. We really want the community to weigh in their thoughts and have that two-way dialogue before recommendations are made, before hopefully the city or the county, in this case, is able to make for some decisions that are mutually beneficial. Once you're done with the 3x5 cards, you can either hand them to the ends and they can pass them in to us, but ultimately Kurt and myself will look at the cards and then we're going to ask the ones that we feel are appropriate for this discussion and also on topic. One of the cards we received previously is what are some places that the monument, I'm assuming the Confederate monument, could be moved. And again, this is not my thoughts on this or the moderator's thoughts, but this is a question the community is asking, and anyone on the panel can answer the question however they feel appropriate. So the first question again, what are some places that the monument could be moved if that were a proposal or if that were something that were trying to happen?
Well, I just said it could go to a museum. We have a museum here in Williamson County, you know, and that's a solution that's been used in other communities.
It has. It has.
So Michael, if we do that, do we have to remove all government funding from the museum? Because the museum is funded in large part today by the county.
That is correct. Very large part.
Okay.
I don't think that would require the removal of funding for the museum. Clearly, where it's placed now, it's an endorsement, it's a celebration of something. In the museums, you know, we expect to find things. Being in a museum isn't necessarily a place of honor. Being in a museum is a place of historical context. So I would be fine with my tax money supporting historical context at a museum. I'm not as excited about it maintaining the celebration of that ideology through that monument.
Museums hold many controversial objects, you know. The Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., you know, is a good example. So,
My thought process on that, though, too, is what you said is very interesting. One of the reasons why I don't want it to go about the endorsement of the government. Right now, it's endorsed by the government, clearly endorsed by the government, and that's what it's saying to people of color when they have to go to the commissioner's court. That this is the endorsement, and what you passed by and what you passed through is this endorsement by your local government that this is correct behavior and everything is fine and this is what we believe. And again, for me, a social activist, that makes my job so easy when I go out into the community and I say, we need help dealing with race and equity in Georgetown and Williamson County, and people say, no, it can't be that bad. Oh, we have a statue on the courthouse lawn, Civil War soldier vet. What? The courthouse? Where they still have commissioner's court? Yes, and they refuse to move it. I don't know why. I'm just the messenger of what the information is. And I can end my conversation in any portion in Williamson County with that. And people are like, oh my God, we have a problem. That's all I have to do.
So may I ask you a question in response to that? So I want to make sure I understand. So is it your point that
Am I being facetious?
No. I just want to make, and I'm not trying to explain for you. I'm trying to make sure I understand that if you have this monument in a county where we have a certain ideology,
yes,
then that jives. That goes together. We
Yes.
have this, and it represents what
Yes.
actually happens here. On the other hand, if by some reason we're forced to remove it and look like we're not like that,
then you don't have to deal with some of the other issues.
then would it be hypocrisy to remove it?
Kind of.
Because that's not what we stand for.
So
Exactly.
This is a good question, a good dialogue.
Exactly.
Just to make sure we give equal opportunities to some of the other questions that are being submitted. Feel free to bring up the questions anytime. Don't just bring them up. That's not a problem at all. I'm going to read the second question. Again, thank you very much for bringing it.
Can I? I'm not sure. Removing the statue would be hypocritical.
Because we still haven't dealt with the issues of race and equity in Williamson County. We would remove the statue and therefore, as a community, say, yay, look at us, we're not racist anymore. The county isn't racist anymore. We've proved it by this wonderful, glorious thing we have done, and now we don't have to worry about our institutions in any way, shape, or form. Mass, go back to doing what you've done before. And everybody pats themselves on the back, and they go on and do what they were doing previously.
And that could definitely be a concern. And that first question that was submitted kind of lends itself to the second question. Again, any one of the participants are more than welcome to respond. What do the participants think about Confederate soldier statues in venues like the national battlefields as a part for the effort to tell the story and preserve the memory of that tragic war? So maybe another way to phrase that question is, what do we think about different types of statues, Confederate statues, in other places to tell a part of a story.
What do I think about?
I can maybe try to rephrase that question in a way that says, what do we feel about like a Confederate statue in the Battle of Antietam, or like let's say a Hitler statue in the Holocaust Museum? So is the issue more the placement or the symbol itself? So what do we think about those statues?
It's definitely the placement. The fact that it's there in front of the Commissioner's Court and people do business there on the regular. Like, people have to go to the Commissioner's Court depending on what business they have to do. Our local police officers and firefighters and any type of personnel that has to go to the Commissioner's Court every Tuesday. It's not like we do Commissioner's Court once in a while. It's every Tuesday and the public attends. This is something we do. If it was anywhere else within the community where it's community engaged, even the park, which would still be kind of crappy, I just wouldn't go to the park. Like, I would choose not to go to the park.
Maybe some other participants, what do you guys think about?
Yeah, so I have a question. We know that the courthouse is going to be decommissioned in the future, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, where it will not be used by the county any longer. It will just become a historic courthouse. Is it okay for it to be there then?
If it changes the structure of what that plate space is, yes.
Not if it's on government land, in my opinion.
Okay.
If it's on government land, it implies the government is endorsing the arguments that put that statue up in the first place. And those arguments are not correct.
So for you, it has to be on private land somewhere.
Yeah, you know, we have freedom of speech. You can fly your Confederate flag in your front yard, and you can put a statue of Robert E. Lee in your front yard. But my point is, it doesn't belong. The government, the Confederacy that was trying to overthrow this government, me as a soldier, they would have been trying to kill me. Yeah. That it has no place on government land.
Just continued discussion on this question that was recently submitted. But I think, is there any other participants that want to weigh in on these types of symbols in a different location, like a Battle of Antietam or National Battleground? Or
I still want them out there where they can be discussed. I think it's critical that we discuss them. Because I can look at the school system today, and most of the kids don't know what the Civil War was. They don't know what the Vietnam War was, which was the one that was important to me. They may know what's going on in the Middle East, where I don't believe that we have a whole lot of business being.
Don't get me started.
If we don't discuss this, it accelerates the rate at which we repeat those mistakes.
Why wouldn't you discuss it if you put the statue in a museum?
Once it's gone, you can't put it in a museum because most museums require some type of funding from a government facility.
But other communities have put these statues in museums,
but you've
and moved them.
Yeah, but you've just told us you don't want it in any public facility that's supported by the government.
I said government. Government.
I don't mind it being in a museum. This museum will eventually leave Georgetown. There's very little doubt of that in my mind. We won't be able to maintain that museum.
If you don't mind me asking, is that more of a, and it's only just because of what you're saying, is it because like people don't frequent museums enough to keep the volume to be able to?
I don't think they frequent them enough. I don't have any issue at all with statues being at museums. I want to see those discussions go on. I've seen people get mad at the museum for having any kind of discussion over the Civil War. That's just how it's worked in the past.
So your concern would be more like if it went to a museum that wasn't able to have enough volume to sustain itself, and a lot of people don't go there anyway. That's not really a way to facilitate the discussion.
So if we look at our museum, it touches between 10 and 14,000 young people per year, typically. And they do that through some crates that they take out to individual schools to talk about it. If we move the statue over there, are we still going to allow them to go talk about what happened during the Civil War? I think that's important, simply because if we don't, it won't happen.
Quick question. So are we saying that the children come to the museum and then because of the proximity, they talk about the Civil War?
Children seldom come to the museum.
Okay.
From what I've seen. Now, it's an interactive museum, which I think is a great thing. Kids can come in there and touch stuff without getting in trouble. I'm very happy to see that.
Yeah.
But I think most of the museum's work ends up being done in the public schools.
Oh, okay.
There's an interesting cross-section between your argument and Jaquita's.
Yeah.
I just like to notice that. I'd like to move on with this conversation as it relates to history, because I think that's an important part here. You talking about it eventually, the whole square becoming a historical experience, really, and then this idea of museums and government property, et cetera. How can history, here's the question, how can history be taught with the realization that interpretations are not absolute, but dependent on a person's or society's experience, beliefs, and values? So I think this touches on...
History is rewritten on a regular basis. I don't think any of us would argue that. History is always being rewritten.
But what's interesting about that is that when we rewrite facts, known information is what disturbs people who were oppressed at that time. So we have a plaque on the courthouse that says black people were pioneers, okay? Everybody knows that's not true. Everybody agrees that's not true, yet for some reason this is still a thing.
I agree, that should be removed.
And if we did nothing about it, if we do nothing about it, in 50 years we're gonna have our kids sitting at a panel like that's historical. It's been there for 100 years. We should be honoring the fact that somebody put that plaque there one day. But it's misinformation.
It's misinformation.
And so it's those situations where we're looking at things that we know for sure. Numbers, we know for sure.
So facts.
Facts.
Apart, as much as you can, apart from
As much as you can. Are I think sometimes, especially in government spaces and situations, should be separate from the interpretive discussion.
As much as possible.
As much as possible, my interpretation has nothing to do with what the facts are about that situation. The facts of that situation is, people wanted to own people that look like me. That's just a fact. Everybody knows that's a fact. They fought over the right to be able to do that because people wanted to change that situation. I can interpret whether these people still want to own me, or whether they mean this or they mean that, or does that mean the racism means the whips and chains are coming tomorrow? All of those interpretations could be my own personal beliefs. But the facts of the matter, what we know to be true, that we have physical evidence that we could touch and smell and see, that we used to have scientific theory proven, those things we can't take away. We can't stop from being what they are.
So bringing it down to a practical level.
Yes.
What would that mean, talking about facts or primary documents?
Yes.
What would that mean for this discussion?
Looking at the Articles of Succession. Yeah. Clearly.
Exactly.
And, Jeff, when you were saying, history is rewritten regularly. I wrote down, as you were speaking, rewritten or reinterpreted, and then dovetailed off of that. No, you're good.
I think it gets both. It gets reinterpreted
Sure.
and rewritten.
But I think there is, obviously, we have some facts. So, which, I want to ask you a question, and this is not an accusation, it's a question. Do you use the N-word?
Say that again?
Do you use the N-word in polite conversation?
No.
Okay. And I wasn't suggesting you did.
But there's several N-words, so which one are you talking about?
I'm talking about the one.
I know.
We're all adults, we can say it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to. And I'm going to guess that you don't say it because you think well, let me ask you, why don't you use it?
I don't agree with it. I think it's a bad word.
Okay. And it's a racist word.
And it's a racist word, and it bothers me to hear anyone use that word.
Right. And again, I asked that because, and that's the answer I suppose that I would get.
But I don't like any racist word.
Right.
I think they're all wrong.
Agreed. One other question, indulge me for a moment. Would you agree that the Confederate monuments have been co-opted by a racist segment of society, the guys in Charlottesville?
I think they've been co-opted by two segments. I think the guys in Charlottesville, some of the white guys have co-opted it. Some of the Nazis have co-opted it. Some of the black people have co-opted them. So it happens on all sides.
Well, it's been co-opted as keeping them and maintaining them has been co-opted by a racist and white supremacist segment of society. Agreed?
I don't know. I'm still looking for that white supremacist portion of society.
Okay. Nazis.
Well, Nazis or the Klan
Sure.
or whoever it is.
Right.
And believe me, I'm active out in the real world. I don't know any of them. They may be out there and I've met them and I just don't realize it.
So my point, though, is that if we look at the creation and the building of these monuments, there are two extremes, I think. One is that it was racist from the start. Came up during Jim Crow. We wanted to intimidate and belittle people of color to reinforce white supremacy. That's like the bad version. The better version, at the other end of the extreme, would be they were a little more benign. They weren't to celebrate history. They were to celebrate heritage. Either way, they have been co-opted by this segment of society. And my thought would be for folks, if you don't want to be associated with racism or racist by not using racist slurs, why not take it the step further and say, because it's been co-opted by these folks, these racists, these white supremacists, these Nazis, I want to distance myself from that as well, because that would be consistent. I love consistency. So I would like to see folks who are really proponents of keeping these monuments up they're not afraid to be associated with racists in that way. Why would they not want to be associated with being racist by the language that they use?
I think that that's part of the reason we're having a discussion, because the status quo, I'm convinced, is not appropriate, precisely because of what you said. Something more has to be said because of it being co-opted, as you stated. Well, I have a question here. Someone asks, Jeff, not to pick on you, Jeff, what do you find terribly offensive on the square?
What do I find terribly offensive?
Yeah, you mentioned.
The most offensive thing I find on the square out of county property is that blue dog. To me, that represents a blue dog Republican, which I find terribly, terribly offensive. I think as you look at people's heritage, if you look over in front of city council chambers, there's a statue of a horse with a man on it. I think is terribly offensive to Native Americans. I think you can look at anything, just about anything on the square and find it offensive. We've been told that the Dan Moody statue is terribly offensive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Simply because he broke the Klan incorrectly.
No, that's not why.
And he didn't break the Klan.
That's not why.
That's my understanding.
Well, did the Klan cease to exist in Williamson County?
No, but he was the first successful prosecution of such.
Wait, no, that's not why. Moody is offensive because, one, it was stated that Moody was put there in response to what happened to the people in the church in South Carolina and to appease people.
Okay, I had not heard
And
that.
that was what was said to the NPR representative, and it was broadcast.
Okay.
So
Who said that?
one of the Rosses, but it's on NPR. Dave Woodkin, I think his name is the reporter who did a whole spiel on this. And the judge was called and said, we're going to have some issues with our Confederate statue. So I have an idea. We're going to do this Dan Moody statue. And that should, make people feel great about what we're doing here in Williamson County. And we're like, whoa, Dan Moody did not only was he not fond of black people, but he restricted their rights to vote in Democratic primaries and took that to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
He didn't think that was okay at all and made that publicly clear. And so for that to be the statement, we were like, whoa, you want to put a Dan Moody statue? Put Dan Moody statue, but that shouldn't be the response.
So, go ahead, John.
Well, I was saying, and just because this question, and just so we can get back to the questions, I think this question is also relatively short, like the question to Jeff. And this goes back to that placement thing. It seems like this is what the community is asking a lot about. If the museum is not viable, so if this was a situation where there is some sort of an effort to move the Confederate monument to the museum, and if the museum were not viable, where would the other option be? And again, this is just a question I'm reiterating from the community. Where would the other option be? And I do think this question is important because you can't just say you have a problem with something without proposing a solution. So if we say not here, we also have to then concurrently say, well, then here instead. That way we're constructive. So Obviously, anyone that can answer the question.
One possibility would be on the ground.
On the ground?
Yeah, it's elevated 21 feet, and
So
I
just
think,
lower.
I think that's part of it. Wherever we put it, I mean, you put it up like that, and it's clearly elevated with an intent to honor. Wherever it goes, I think if you maintain the elevation, which probably wouldn't be practical in a museum. I don't know how high the ceilings are in the museum.
You'd have to raise the roof.
Right.
You could offer it to some of these organizations, these Confederate organizations, and let them have it.
And I literally
There's
don't know. Do we
also-
have a Confederate cemetery here?
We do have a cemetery.
Well, the
yes.
guy that stands in the Confederate uniform in April, I forget his name.
Oh, he
Little.
was here,
Yeah,
Shelley.
anyway, he's part of a Confederate group,
Sons of the Confederate Bands.
so, you know.
Any other thoughts, real quick? And just because we're wrapping up, but I still want to get to a couple more of these questions. Any other ideas on where, if the museum were not an option? Yes, sir.
I think we need to be realistic. The Confederate soldier statue is not going to be moved. It's not going to happen. I agree with Michael and several other people. We ought to get all of those symbols off of public property, and that includes the religious symbols too, the Ten Commandments, monuments, and so forth. Where do we draw the line? I think the only thing we can do now with all the confusion is seek compromise, resolve this matter in a way that Jeff can appreciate it and Chiquita and most of us can.
Can I ask a question? I want to ask Jeff a question. When he was talking, you made the statement that if we got rid of the Confederate monument, we'd have to get rid of monuments to soldiers in World War II, and so why?
They're on government property, one. Two, they're offensive to someone. If you look at a World War II monument and you talk to someone that's of Asiatic descent, that is offensive to them. And it's offensive because we went into their areas and killed their relatives.
So,
And that is consistent across the board.
No, it's
We
not.
can't determine who's offended by any particular statute.
And this is actually very, very good discussion. The bread and butter of this roundtable is being discussed right here. So I'm going to try my best to make sure we still end by 1:30, but reallocate some of the remaining time. But I did want to see if we can get back to maybe one or two more of the community questions, if we can. So, Reverend.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one quick thing.
Sure.
Slavery, being against slavery is, it's not the same thing that you're talking about. Of course, there are people that have different opinions about different wars, but we're talking about a morally unambiguous issue, slavery.
I doubt anyone here is for slavery.
Pardon?
I doubt anyone in this room is for slavery.
Yeah,
Right.
well, none of us probably are. But go ahead, Reverend.
Well, none of us are for slavery, but I think there is something to be said. The Stars and Stripes flew over many an atrocity.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right? The Trail of Tears, for
Sure.
example.
Mm-hmm.
But when we have it here, I'm not confessing by that I think that that's good in any way whatsoever.
Right.
So I think that's something we should think about.
Right, and just to be clear, the Stars and Stripes weren't flying over the Confederate soldiers.
No.
I mean, I know you know that.
That's correct.
But I think for me, that's the distinction, or at least a big part of it. That was the enemy of the United States. Nationalism in other contexts, Japanese folks, I'm sure, some folks of Japanese descent find what America did to end World War II horrendous, and rightfully so. It certainly is worth the discussion. But that's our nationalism. I mean, we have to own. We can salute and stand to the flag, and when I do that, it's to celebrate the ideals of America, what we're supposed to stand for. Understanding we have fallen short time and time and time again, but that's it's kind of like family. We have to deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly because it's our family. But that's when it's somebody else's family.
Thank you, Rob. One quick question. Anyone else have some more cards that they've thought of? A question? Did you? Okay. All right. Here's a question here. Is history/heritage, this is kind of a loaded question, more important than the safety and dignity of people of color who live in Georgetown now, today?
Yes.
participants don't all speak at once.
Oh, I would have started, but I was trying to hold back. Because the answer is yes. The answer is always going to be yes. As long as the statute's there, the answer is yes. And that's why I love that it stays. I don't have to make this argument. I don't have to fight this fight. It makes it for itself. I am not enough. If there were more of me, then we would not be sitting here having this discussion. But because there's 4% African Americans in Georgetown, we're sitting here having this discussion.
Interesting perspective.
Because there are less of me, everyone can think less of me. And that is okay. My emotions, my feelings, my thought process, how I move through space in Georgetown does not matter, and it never will. And it's very clear that that's what the statute represents. I understand that. I am supposed to understand that. That's what the statute was put there for, my understanding of that situation. And I get the message loud and clear. My issue is with people who want to tell me how I should feel about the statute. And I shouldn't take it that way. It's just their heritage and their history. Cool, if that's how you want to see it. But trust, this is how I feel. This is how I was meant to feel. And I know that doesn't matter.
And then maybe any other feedback on this question, and then maybe Kurt can ask one final one.
So the question was, does history and heritage matter more than, and I'll reframe, inclusivity, basically.
Yeah.
But then the follow would be, should it? The way I heard you is that living here, it is clear that history and heritage, celebration of that history and heritage, is more important to the community than do you think, should it be?
I have one comment. The discrepancy between history and heritage and people of color in that question, the issue is that the history is being distorted. History and heritage should go together and respect people of color, and that's exactly what that statute does not do.
So I think, and again, the bread and butter for this roundtable was for us to have difficult, heated conversations about very contentious issues in a civil way, where no one is in all caps yelling at each other behind their keyboard. I think now, as our second roundtable, we've showed this is possible.
Yeah.
So now, how do we turn this discussion into resolution or solution? Or as a psychologist said, a retired psychologist, and I love that word, the compromise. I think we can all conclude, as everyone has said, the status quo alone is not enough. It's going to the interpretations from the status quo might cause people of color to feel disenfranchised. At the same token, we're never going to be able to satisfy both of the extremes. The extremes of the people who are just like, burn it all down, you know? And then we're not going to be able to satisfy the exact opposite extreme, which is like, let's do nothing. I think we all recognize that. So where are the places in between those two that as a community of mature, adult people that are balanced and that are not extremes, but by saying, where as a community of mature people can we come together and say, let's be done with this, you know? I don't intend to be having roundtables forever. I actually have other things to attend to and a young family. So I think you all know the proposal that the Reverend and I have mentioned. I know there are different groups in this county that have proposed different things for us to come together. One of the other proposals was a plaque to clarify other contextual issues during the time of the Civil War. One of the concerns the Reverend and I had with the plaque is doing so makes the people that support the statue a little bit finicky, because they don't, like he said, they don't want anything tainted or contaminated anywhere near it. And I can respect that. Some people, they like the plaque idea, some people don't, but I get the idea that it might be difficult to unify a community around that. But if we did not touch the current Confederate monument for one reason alone, there are some people that see that as nothing more than like a grave marker to their great-great-great-granddad. They don't see it as a racist symbol. They don't see it as a hateful thing. I'm not saying that's my interpretation or Jaquita's interpretation or anyone's interpretation. I'm saying it's their interpretation. It's how they see it. It's their perspective. Diversity of meanings. So what if we left it alone for their diversity of meanings? We don't tell them how to feel. Like Jaquita said, we don't tell anyone how to feel. So if they feel neutral by it and non-racial by it, we could leave it there. And if our town does not have a racial problem and we celebrate equality, it should be pretty simple to erect another statue in another area of the square, but somewhere that's equally visible, because like we've talked about, placement is key. Placement shows how much you honor a value. So the same height, the same level of visibility, but say our county, our city celebrates justice, celebrates equality, celebrates our minorities, celebrates the deliverance from oppression. That's why Kurt and I said, what if we just erected another statue, equal height, that celebrates that? That way the people that have different meanings and different interpretations can be able to equally celebrate that. That's one of the reasons why we've been pushing for that. How far is it going to go? I don't know, because I can't see the future. That's not my thing. But what I do know, as a theologian, but also as a businessman, is dialogue and discussion is so important. That way we're not just angry at each other behind our computers, and then in the middle of the night, one of our residents does something stupid that makes our town look bad. And I don't think any one of us want that. We need to have these discussions in the light and in the open like this, instead of removing statues in the middle of the night like they had to do in other cities, which I personally don't advocate for. If you're going to do something, you should be proud enough to do it during the day. That's what ministers say. You know, nothing good happens at dark. You know, anyway, unless it's a nighttime prayer service. But what are some of the participants' thoughts on our proposal? And again, you don't have to agree with it. It's just, it's our proposal, which we haven't been secretive about. It's our proposal because we feel it's the way to honor everyone's sentiments, not telling everyone how to think, allowing the diversity of meanings. We understand that some people aren't going to like it, but it's saying, look, you've got something you can support, and then we've got something else that shows we do not support oppression in the city. What are some thoughts about it? And seriously, feel free to say anything that's on your mind.
Yeah, I want to hear this.
I have one comment. So you put up a statue, justice, equality, and all that, and somebody walks up to you and say, you put that great statue up, but what do you got that Confederate memorial up there for?
True. One of the reasons why we thought about this was because, again, diversity of meanings for the Confederate monument. Yes, for some people they look at that as a racist symbol. But we try to look at it as it also can be a neutral symbol, is what we believe. And we believe also the process of being able to put another statue up that shows deliverance, we believe if we can get there, it actually shows the problem is behind us, frankly.
So when we talked about the stars and stripes and the atrocities that have been done under our flag, one of the reasons why I believe that I can look at the flag and see it as the ideals which we strive for, right? And not those things that we did poorly in the past, is because I freely acknowledge our mistakes and our sins, frankly, to use a biblical word, of our past. And so this idea is to present and acknowledge our past in a way that's free and open, and then confess what we hold as our values, that all people are created in the image of God and of equal value. And to me, that's a more powerful way to get to the heart of the issue, which is what I feel like Jaquita wants to do.
Yeah, my only comment on that is, you know, the American flag, we are not lying about our history. We are not lying about the Trail of Tears, and we're trying to deal with it. But the Confederate memorial is a lie about history. It lies. It says it's not about the, slavery. It lies. In the sense that they say it wasn't a war or rebellion. They call it the War of Northern Aggression. Who started the war? The Southerners attacked Fort Sumter.
And as someone who's a 6-year Navy veteran,
I'm an Army veteran.
Well, we all know which one's better. So
I can't do this with you guys now.
I can't. I'm trying to make sure I say a neutral moderator, but obviously, yes, there's a diversity of meaning, so yes, what you're saying is true. There are also perspectives in where someone sees a Confederate flag or Confederate monument as nothing more than a picture of their grandfather. Now, I'm not saying that I see it that way. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying there are some people who, when they look at the Confederate flag, all they see is my grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather who died.
They should get educated.
It would be very painful to rip that from their heart. But what are seriously, other people, thoughts, Brian, Jeff, Rob, and any other thoughts on this idea of leaving the current, erecting something else, especially when we talk about rewriting history, reinterpreting history. We believe it's kind of, it's innovative, it's forward thinking to say this was one part of our history, and then during this next period of 100 years, here's a statue that represents that period, and then you're essentially, you add history, and sometimes you have to, you can't keep doing that forever because then you run out of space, but you just keep making sure history is a fair balance of things. But seriously, thoughts?
It ultimately ends up being up to the Commissioner's Court and building enough support to be able to do something through that Commissioner's Court.
Right. But if we are fans of history and we want it to be accurate and it's all about celebrating history and that's why I'll dispel my beliefs and let's just say that is a historical marker. We talked about last time how when we have these on town squares, it's by nature an incomplete telling of history. This is one thing that we thought was real important at one point, so we put it up. If we want to keep it there and if we want to put it into context, one thought I had was to create some sort of a monument or some sort of response, maybe celebrating Juneteenth. So that way you can't leave that square without recognizing, well, we have a soul, no braver soul has ever fought, or whatever it says on there. Well, that's an incomplete telling of what that was about. But if you combine that with a Juneteenth monument, well, what's Juneteenth, Dad? Well, you see, folks were slaves, and then they stopped being slaves one day, and those two things go together.
Yes.
And so if you want to tell that history, that would be one option that would at least add undeniable context to what the monument is.
Yes.
Well, so before we start closing out, one of the biggest things is, did we accomplish our goal? And our goal was answering the overarching question of, do Confederate monuments send racial statements? And I think indirectly and directly we have addressed that question. Do they? Well, of course they do, because of what they represent, because there's a diversity of meaning. I'm by no means saying that's the only message it sends. That's not what I'm saying. But it is clearly one of the messages it sends, just like the rainbow has a diversity of meanings in today's day and age. To me as a theologian, it's the covenant between God and man, but I also know in the modern day, it has another meaning. Things sometimes have multiple meanings. Because of the negative connotation or meaning behind the Confederate monuments, is there something we need to do to make sure that other cities, neighbors, people that visit our town do not think that that is what we mean by it, or do not think that is the only interpretation we support? Those were the overarching questions for this roundtable. Do those symbols have those racial meanings as part of the diversity of meanings? And if it does, what do we need to proactively do so the extremists don't think, well, that's what you mean by it. No, that's not what we mean by it. We mean something else by it. So how do we avoid that? Again, our thoughts was to erect something else. I respect other ideas of how we as a town can say, well, there's other ways to make sure people don't get the wrong meaning or the wrong intention by what we're saying. A lot of other cities are not doing compromise solutions. They're not. Most other cities just go online, and business is called benchmarking. What are other successful businesses doing? Well, what are other successful cities doing? There's only like one or two other cities that I know of that's not just removing in the middle of the night with the militia and the armed guard and National Guard and everybody else. And I would hate to see it end like that for our town. I think we're better than that. I think we're smarter than that. And I think we are more unified than that. So the last thing we want to do before Kurt closes us down is I want to give each one of the participants just 1 or 2 minutes to maybe some positives you learned from today, your thoughts on this overarching question, and just really any thoughts that you might have, 1 or 2 minutes. That way you give your final thoughts. And again, the reason why we're videoing this, the reason why we're doing this in community is because we think we can catalyze change for the nation. We think that we can show if Georgetown can do a different solution than like what UT Austin did or Dallas is about to do or some of the other cities, maybe other cities can realize, wait a second, maybe we can find mutually beneficial compromise solutions. So again, just maybe close out with just a couple thoughts, whatever's on your mind, 1 or 2 minutes. We'll just go ahead and go in quick succession, so go ahead.
Well, I really haven't actually changed my opinion, but I will say if we can't remove the statue, then I would support a compromise. But I would like to say that this idea about the interpretation of history, that there are two things going on here. There's interpretation of history and there's facts. And what I see going on is a distortion of the facts. And I think that that needs to be corrected. And that statue represents a portrayal of facts that are not true about that rebellion and what it represented and who it oppressed. And because of that, I'm still for removal. And the other thing, removing those things at night and stuff, the reason that was done was to prevent conflict. Well, yeah. So, and I'm always for preventing conflict, especially physical conflict. And so, before we condemn those people for doing it that way, they were doing it with the intent of public safety. And that's all I have.
Of course, I agree with you. I respect you. Thank you.
As always, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and for y'all to put this together. And again, reaffirms that we can sit across from folks, some folks who we agree with, even though those agreements might be nuanced, and some folks who we might disagree with, and have productive conversations. In a perfect world, the city of Georgetown, Williamson County, would come to this conclusion on its own. That we want to be inclusive, we want to celebrate things worth celebrating. The fact that we, for some reason, can't arrive there as a community without prodding, and even with prodding, we can't get there. It's disconcerting. It's very frustrating and doesn't really make me hopeful for the near future. Now, I think our grandkids will probably figure it out. Doesn't do a lot for us, So, yeah, I would like to see. I'd like to see more folks here. I know it's daytime.
Yeah, that's probably what it is.
But people seem to have a lot of opinions about this issue.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't know that by the turnout here today, and that's frustrating. That makes me think that folks are more excited and more willing to be the all caps keyboard warriors instead of actually just dragging your butt down here. For an hour and a half of meaningful discussion. So, maybe next time we can do it at night.
At night.
For the final one, yeah.
But I think, anyway, I do believe when reasonable people come together, compromise can be reached. To Mr. Bolton's opening comments, I agree. The extremes are rarely satisfied with any compromise. And as a lawyer, I prefer to settle things when we can, and that usually doesn't make me happy, but it makes it good enough to get done. And that's good. And I'm not picking on Mr. Bolton, but the only other thing I would say is that I don't think we should stop talking about slavery or the Confederacy or any of that, because I do believe history is important. And, we can all learn from each other. Dialogue is important, and difficult discussions are essential. And so this is a piece of that process. So again, thanks for having me here.
Thank you.
Her name was Heather Headley. She died because she thought that this was important to talk about, that this was important to march about, that this was important to protest about. And somebody disagreed with her, and they ran her and a bunch of people over with a car. At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. The difference between you want to do something peacefully and talk about it, and someone willing to murder you over a discussion. And so when we're sitting here and we're saying, we just want to talk about this and come to some kind of solution, and everybody's backbiting about how we do that. Understand that somebody lost their life behind us trying to have this discussion, and her name was Heather Headley. Somebody lost their daughter who just wanted to have a peaceful protest. And that's not right. And so when I come here and I'm having these conversations, I'm not having them for my sake. I'm having them because somebody else's daughter shouldn't have to lose their life because we didn't want to sit in the room and have a conversation about what we should do next time. That's really all I have to say about it.
I've enjoyed the meeting. I appreciate the invitation. I've been happy to listen to the different points of view. I respect all of the points of view, and I tend to agree with most of what I've heard, even from the conservative Republicans.
I say I was a Republican.
Yeah, I think so. But that's the value in having a discussion. We can see that, in fact, we agree on many issues if we just think about them. Just one clarification. I said, let's stop talking about slavery, Rob, but I meant in conjunction with trying to resolve the statue problem. We should not stop talking about slavery or the Civil War. All young people and middle-aged and older people need to be educated in history so we can understand where we've been. Most of us here benefited from slavery. White people did. Black people suffered from it. That's in the past, but we can still understand what happened and why it should not have happened, and we can change our attitudes. We have to make the effort. And I think this was a good first start or second round, and I was pleased to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My comments are pretty much going to echo his. Thank you for allowing me to participate. I think this is a discussion that needs to continue.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to thank each and every one of you for being part of this conversation. I do want to echo what Jaquita said, that it's important that the conversation continue and that we get more and more people involved, because as long as we're talking to each other and respecting each other as persons created in the image of God, then we're not fighting each other violently, right? And that's super, super important. And so each of you taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here and make this a priority, and it can be uncomfortable at times, I really appreciate, I want you to hear that, I really appreciate each and every one of you, not only here, but here in the audience, coming and participating in this. I think it's crucial. Next time we're going to do this, we'll try to do this in the evening to get more participation, and we'd like to get some city leaders as well as county leaders involved. So look for that. And also please check out our website, messiahcod.org/GCRI. And if you need that, you can talk to me and we can write it down so you can find it. Before we leave, I'd like to end us in a prayer that's attributed to St. Francis, and I think it encapsulates the spirit of what we're trying to do here as we move forward. So let us pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, unity. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Again, everyone, thank you for coming. That's 2 out of 2 that we're on time. And if you have any questions at all, I know we weren't able to get to every question. Please email us. Maybe we can ask some of the participants for our third roundtable, hopefully our final roundtable. And again, truly, thank you guys for joining.